Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So we just finished a few videos talking about the real-life influences behind Star Wars armor. And now we want to talk about the real-life equipment that Star Wars blasters are based off of. But it seems like every time we mention weapons, even if they are fictional ones from the Star Wars universe, YouTube seems to flag us and we get less ads as a result. But thankfully for this episode, we found a sponsor who is willing to help us out. And they love Star Wars just as much as we do. Remember when we were young guys and we used to collect and trade all those Topps cards? You know, there was the football ones, the baseball ones, and even the Star Wars ones. And we had these gigantic binders full of protective sleeves to make sure that our cards didn't get damaged or bent or anything like that. And if we had a really good one, we had like a special case, right? Well, things back then were kind of complicated and it was a hassle to lug all these cards around to show off to your friends and trade. So Topps has made a move to transfer all these cards into the digital age. It's pretty awesome. There's a collection of Star Wars cards with characters from every period in Star Wars, from the original trilogy to the prequels to even the Rogue One films. And Topps is always coming out with new packs, limited edition packs, and special packs for you to collect. As a matter of fact, they've just collaborated with Hasbro to bring you guys the vintage Kenner collection. You know, the 1976 action figures that came out with the original Star Wars film? Like a lot of the cool special packages, they're highly sought after amongst the Topps community, so make sure you look out for them because it'll make your collection stand out, or give you the leverage you need when it comes to trading with other collectors. And best of all, this app is free, so if you want to download it, we'll link it in the description down below. And you can trade with us. Our fan name is The Generation Tech. Alright guys, thanks for being patient. Now on with the rest of the show. As we talked about in our prior episode, one of the reasons why Star Wars is visually appealing and familiar is because of its use of modified real-world equipment. Star Wars was created in the late 1970s, just a few years after the Vietnam War. Popular firearms at the time were the AK-47, the M16, and the M14. Naturally, when George Lucas and his prop division were figuring out what blasters and other energy weapons would look like, they decided to go with less recognizable World War II and earlier equipment instead. Another reason was because the original Star Wars had an extremely tight budget of only $11 million. That's around $40 million in today's money. And remember, they were pioneering state-of-the-art visual effects. With millions of World War II surplus guns lying around, it was much easier to buy a few and modify them rather than create original props. So George Lucas contacted Bapty & Co., an armorer that had been supplying historical firearms to films since 1919. Outside of their more historical work, they've designed props for movies and TV shows like Aliens and Doctor Who. They were also the main provider of prop weapons for Star Wars Episode 4 and Episode 5. But again, because the movie had such a low budget, Lucas was only able to rent these props from Bapty & Co. After the production was done, they had to hand them back. This included several of the original E11 blasters, which today are priceless. Well, talking about the E11 blaster, let's start with that. It's probably the most prolifically used blaster in the original Star Wars film. Designed by Blastech, one of the premier manufacturers in the Star Wars galaxy, it's the standard issue weapon for all stormtroopers. Much smaller than the main battle rifle used by the clone troopers during the Clone Wars, the E11 had great ergonomics, many up-to-date functions you would desire in a modern blaster, like different power settings for lethal and non-lethal takedowns. This blaster became as much of a symbol for tyranny and stability as the Stormtrooper helmet or Star Destroyer. Which is ironic because the E11 is based off another very famous weapon, the Sterling submachine gun. Designed at the end of World War II, it was the preferred submachine gun for many NATO allied countries during the Cold War, well, besides the US. Its compact size made it a favorite amongst commandos, paratroopers, and sailors. Like most of the guns used in Star Wars, there were only very few superficial changes to the outward appearance. Now, there were hero props designed for close-ups, but actually a lot of the E11s were still functional firearms. In A New Hope, you can even see actors firing blanks out of them. Good thing they did sound in post, otherwise this whole scene would sound like this.
Keep moving down, fellas, quickly. Through the doors.
Next up is one of my favorites, the Blastech T21 Repeating Blaster. You don't see many of these beauties in the films, but one of the unit leaders sent to the surface of Tatooine is carrying one. To this day, I still think he's one of the most badass looking stormtroopers out there. This was an extremely powerful weapon and could pierce the light armor on certain vehicles. It could be fired from a handheld position or placed onto a tripod. T-21s were oftentimes hooked up to portable generators, otherwise their firing rate and round capacity would be severely limited. The T-21 was based off another very famous machine gun, the Lewis gun. Like Generation Tech, it's American designed and British produced, and it was one of the first light machine guns that could be carried by individuals. But it's perhaps more well known as one of the first machine guns used in aerial combat. The Lewis gun featured a recognizable shroud which is filled with water to make sure the barrel doesn't overheat. It also features an odd circular magazine which unfortunately didn't make it into the T-21 design. I thought it would kind of look cool as a portable power generator. So if you watched our previous video about Galactic Empire armor and uniforms, you'll know that a lot of it was inspired by World War I and World War II German designs. Our next weapon also hails from the factories of Germany. This is the Blastech DLT-19. This heavy blaster rifle was an alternative to the E11. Its poorly designed ergonomics meant that it wasn't ideal in close combat. Unless you're a Wookiee, that is. In his hands, it looks like a carbine. In open spaces, it was perfect. It had a long range, a lot of power, and a high firing rate. It was sometimes even used as a support weapon that could provide suppressing fire. During the Clone Wars, clone troopers also used a similar heavy blaster rifle on large battlefields. Both of these rifles were built from the German MG-34. Built during the restrictive time period between World War I and World War II, the MG-34 was hands down the finest machine gun in the earlier years of the war. It is a multi-purpose weapon that can function in a handheld capacity with drum magazines or on a tripod and belt fed. They had an extremely high firing rate of 900 rounds per minute. That's 15 rounds per second. Not even a Jedi could dodge that. But like many German things, the MG-34 ended up being too complicated and high performance to be mass produced, so the MG-42 was created instead. It's kind of like the BMW M series compared to all that other crap they make. Well guys, that's all we have for you today. Next episode, we'll be looking at the crazy hodgepodge of weapons that the Rebels are trying to use to overthrow the Galactic Empire. A special thanks to Tops again for sponsoring this video. Please do check out their app because without them, we probably wouldn't have been able to make this video because of YouTube's kind of restrictive AI algorithm thing, which isn't as intelligent as Facebook's, which is terrifying. Did you guys read about Facebook's AI? We're all gonna die. Well, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.